It's as simple as riding a bike. You know, that's a phrase that's used often to talk about the fact that we, after learning an activity, if we take some time off from it, we can pretty well jump back to that activity after a short amount of time. Now, we see this a lot in fitness, especially when people take time off from exercise, or if they have not done an exercise for a matter of time and go back to it. And we refer to it as muscle memory. But what exactly is muscle memory? Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Williamson, president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I appreciate you listening. And also, if you have any questions about this particular podcast or any others, or if you have any questions that you want answered, especially concerning health, fitness, and wellness, or myths of health, fitness, and wellness, please feel free to reach out to me at my email address, which is Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. You can also reach us through our website, which is personaledgefitness.com, and that is also our Facebook page at Personal Edge Fitness. If you would like to speak to us in person, please feel free to call us at 251-341-0927 at our Mobile location, or you can call us at 251-651-0927 at our Eastern Shore location. I was talking to a new client the other day, and we were speaking about exercise, or we're speaking about starting to work out. We typically get a fitness history on our clients if they've been involved with some kind of fitness or activities in their life. We're trying to look for any injuries they may have or things that they like to do, or pretty much learn about them prior to getting started. And of course, he told me about his exploits in high school and working out and playing soccer and actually wrestling. But there's something that he kept on repeating during the workout. And that was, as we're doing different exercise, he kept on repeating muscle memory, muscle memory, muscle memory. Now, I'm not sure he was referring to muscle memory as to what it actually is, and that got me thinking. That term is thrown around a lot, and I was curious how many people really knew what muscle memory is. Now, we speak about muscle memory, and I see it used commonly to describe the ability to regrow muscle after taking some time off from working out. In other words, taking time off from exercising for months and then coming back to it, and the muscles have atrophy, but people talk about the fact that their muscles come back because they have muscle memory. Well, actually, that's a side effect, or I should say an indirect cause of muscle memory. Muscle memory actually refers to your brain's ability to understand a skill or be able to repeat a skill that it's done before and actually go back to it rather simply. And because you can go back to that skill easily, then your gains come quicker. And that's why we think that muscle memory actually deals with the muscle's ability to regrow, but it's actually a secondary result of your adapting to the skill. So this doesn't actually occur in the muscle. It occurs in the brain. And understanding the connection between the brain and the body is very significant for a personal trainer. This is something you hear me talk about a lot. I talk about the brain for many reasons. One reason is because nobody comes for a physical reason. Everybody comes to us for a mental reason. But the other part is understanding how the brain is communicating sending the signals to the muscles. Understanding that allows us to conduct the exercises much easier. Also, it allows us to understand exactly what's going on so we can actually teach a client more efficiently, let's say. So it's very significant for a trainer to know that. Now, I can get extremely technical with this, but I'm trying to stay away from it. But I'm going to give you some information as far as the brain, and especially when it comes to memory. There are three basic types of memory. There's declarative memory, which is basically knowing facts. Understanding that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. That's a fact, and that's more in declarative memory. Different memories are handled by different parts of the brain. So declarative memory and the episodic memory, which is actually the memory of life events, like remembering that you had a conversation with somebody or remembering that you went to work the day before. Both declarative memory and episodic memory are located in what's called the temporal lobe and also the hippocampus. Procedural memory, which is what we're talking about, which is developing skills, is actually located in several parts of the brain. Now, these areas include the motor cortex. This is the part of the brain which sends signals to the muscle of the body and is responsible for planning and executing movements. The basal ganglia, a structure deep inside the brain, which is associated with movement initiation. We've spoken about that before in, I believe, podcast 5 also. And the cerebellum, an area in the back of the brain that handles adaptation. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about the cerebellum. But the cerebellum does, I always say that cerebellum is where you control agility and balance. Well, it controls adaptation, so it's easy to understand why I say that it controls agility and balance. And also, if you're working on agility or balance, either one, you're working on the other. So if you're working on agility, you're working on balance, you're working on balance, you're working on agility, because you're stimulating the cerebellum. And as always, that does not change because time passes on the calendar. You have those abilities. It's just you lose it when you don't use it. So this procedural memory really does branch out throughout the brain. And it's all about making connections, which is why the procedural memory takes so much of the brain, because you're looking at connecting things like eyes. You're connecting what the eye is seeing to the hand movement or foot movement or what have you. For instance, they did a study using MRIs. Researchers did a study on individuals that were taking 6 weeks of juggling, and they actually did an MRI of their brain and looked at it before and after the 6 weeks. And what they found is you've got white matter and gray matter in the brain. And they started to see white matter, this stringy, long fibers that connect different parts of the brain together. They started to see this spread out, and it connect in parts of the brain that controls the eye, the part of the brain that controls the hands, and they started seeing just more and more of this increase. They actually started to see an increase in gray matter between those parts of the brain. And it's easy to see that basically communications were being bridged. And so you started to have these initial increase in neuropathways, like I talk about a lot in the cerebellum. You started seeing that increase in neuropathways, so therefore the communication became faster, quicker, and therefore the individuals could actually learn to juggle. Now, the white matter is basically, now I'm really simplifying this, but the white matter helps make the connections between the parts of the brain. The gray matter is made up of brain cell, actually neuron bodies, and is where information processing in the brain occurs. So when we increase that amount of gray matter, then we get better processing. Now, in order to have that memory, you're creating those skills, but in order for those skills to be stored and stay and create what we call muscle memory, you've got to have some other changes in brain function. These brain functions that initiate a skill or learn a skill are different than the ones that actually store and keep the skill. Now, studies have shown that at the very beginning of learning a new movement, there's a large amount of activity across the brain, but particularly in an area known as the premotor cortex. Now, this lies just in front of the primary motor cortex and is normally associated with movement planning. Now, high levels of activity are also seen in that basal ganglia, which is normally active during a movement initiation. So you have movement planning and movement initiation. That makes sense. If you're learning a new skill, you've got to plan how you're going to do that skill. You know, your brain's got to think through, okay, if I'm going to go up these stairs sideways, I need to feel like a right foot's got to go before a left. That's planning it. And then actually moving the leg. That's initiation. And that's what's going on when we're actually learning a skill. Now, as these skills become more automatic and more effortless, basically like learning any skill, I'm thinking of one that we use quite often. We use our stairs a lot at our mobile location to work on people's hips, to work on their balance, to work on their agility, and also work on their anaerobic capacity. And I have clients actually go up sideways in a myriad of ways. 2 feet on one step, going up to 1 foot on a step, crossing over in the front, crossing over in the back, actually turning in the middle of it. And as those skills become easier, you can see it. You can actually see a client start to go faster. What's happening in the brain is after repeated practice of this action, it does become effortless, and the activity in the premotor cortex and basal ganglia decreases. Now, what's interesting about this is that other areas, such as not the premotor cortex, but the motor cortex and the cerebellum, remain active even when the action has become automatic, but it becomes much more focused. Now, I'll talk about this, the way I would describe this in the cerebellum, as I talk about the neuropathways there. When you start out learning a skill, the neuropathways are like a dirt road. But then they start to become a 2-lane paved road as you do the activity more. Then they become a 4-lane road, and they become an 8-lane superhighway. So what's happening is those thoughts, those communications, those changes that you're making, adaptations that you're making, become far more efficient. And that's what they're talking about when they talk about in the studies. They realized that they were becoming more focused in those parts of the brain. Well, actually, it's just becoming far more efficient. the interesting thing to me about it, and where muscle memory really does happen and what is established, is that it moves from that premotor cortex and the basal ganglia into the motor cortex and cerebellum, and that's basically where it kind of resides. Now, they did some studies on, this was kind of very interesting to me, they did studies on people who play the violin. The more skilled violinists were asked to perform a Mozart concerto that they'd never played before, and some violinists that weren't quite as skilled but were pretty good did the same Mozart concerto, and they scanned their brains under MRI, and they found out that the more novice ones, what was going on in their brain, they had more activity in that premotor cortex and that basal ganglia, whereas the professional group showed a lot more activity going on in the cerebellum and in the motor cortex, because they had kind of conquered the skills needed and created those white fibers and communications amongst the brain between the eye, the hands, the fingers, and what have you. They weren't using that area as much. They were going more to their muscle memory area, which is the other parts of the brain. And so it's easy to see where, and I'm sorry, I'm breaking this down and making it very simple. It can get very, very, very technical, as you can tell. But for procedural skills and procedural memory, you develop the skill in one part of the brain, you increase those neural pathways, and then it starts to get stored in more or less another part of the brain. You're starting to use it much more there. Much like when you're trying to remember somebody's name. Unless it makes it into that hippocampus or it makes it past the prefrontal cortex, you're not going to remember somebody's name. That becomes part of your memory. You're doing that same thing, more or less, when you're learning procedural memory. And that's why we can pick up these exercises, just like riding a bike, get back to them quicker, because basically our brain has adapted. Now, I want to remind everybody something I mentioned earlier, and that is this does not change with time passing on a calendar. Not whatsoever. And just because you may not pick up a skill that you did in high school 30 years ago as quickly as you think you should pick it up, listen, that has nothing to do with time passed on a calendar. That has everything to do with practice again. And as usual, you want to increase the speed with how you pick it up and how you adapt. Well, one great tip I can give you is obviously drinking water. 30% of the water that you drink is used by your brain. You find yourself not being able to remember your next door neighbor's name. That's lack of water causing that. Your brain function slows down with lack of water. So you want to speed up your ability to remember those activities or your ability to pick up on them faster. Drinking water is one way. Another way, of course, is repeating the exercise. It'll come back to you. Your brain has done it before. It will remember. And if you're wanting to create muscle memory, obviously dive head first into those exercises. Start repeating them, and your brain will learn that muscle memory. This is also why we use a variety of exercises and change the exercises with clients. And you've heard this before about the more variety you put into your routine, the faster your changes are. And that's true. And the reason being is because your brain really has not made the connections from that eye to that hand or what have you. If you go from a straight bench press with a barbell to a dumbbell bench press, it is sending out messages to fire, hey, fire that muscle, hey, fire that muscle, firing a variety of muscles to figure out it has not honed its technique. It has not gotten to that focused cerebellum activity to control the weight. Therefore, it's firing a lot more muscles. Therefore, other muscles are getting worked. This is why the variety does make a difference. Not absolutely required. I've talked about variety and exercise before, but I think I've gone a little too much into talking about muscle memory. I hope that answers your questions about that. If you have any other questions about it, please feel free to contact me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. You can contact us through the website at personaledgefitness.com or on our Facebook page at Personal Edge Fitness. I hope to hear from you either about this subject or any others, but hey, muscle memory, just one more way we help you find your level of wellness.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.